Everyone tells you to just say no. Practice it, rehearse it, use a script even. But when the moment comes, you still say yes. Now here's why. You're not failing at saying no. You're failing to understand that saying no is only one part of setting a boundary. And it's not even the most hardest part. I'm Patty Ferreira. This is part 3 of the Boundary series. And today we're dismantling the worst advice people give about boundaries, which is just say no. Because here's the truth. Saying no is not the problem. Most people can say no. The problem is what happens before you say it and how you say it. And most importantly, what you do after you say it. And that's what no one teaches you. They give you scripts, communication tips, ways to be more direct, but none of that addresses the real issue, which is this. There are 3 parts to setting a boundary, and you're probably dropping the ball on at least 2 of them. So let's break it down. Here's what most people don't understand about boundaries. A boundary isn't just what you say. It's what you decide, what you communicate, and what you enforce. 3 parts. Part 1, setting the boundary. Part 2, communicating the boundary. And part 3, holding the boundary. Most people skip part 1 entirely. They rush to part 2, which is communicating the boundary, because that's what everyone tells them to focus on. And then they completely abandon part 3 because they think once they've said it, it's done. But here's the reality. If you skip part 1, your boundary isn't actually yours. It's everyone else's. If you mess up part 2, you're negotiating when you should be stating. And if you drop part 3, you're expecting them to enforce your boundary for you, which they never do. Because it's not their job, it's yours. So let me show you what I mean by these 3 parts. Setting a boundary is not about deciding what's fair or reasonable or what everyone else can handle. Setting a boundary is about deciding what you need for yourself, based on your capacity, your values, your well-being, not theirs. Here's the standard for part 1. You put yourself first, not in a selfish way, in a self-preserving way. You ask yourself, what do I actually need here? What can I tolerate? What am I willing to do? And what am I willing not to do? And then you decide for yourself. But here's where most people drop the standard. They don't set the boundary based on what they need. They set it based on what they think the other person can handle. Let me give you an example. So you're exhausted, your calendar is full, and you have no bandwidth for anything else. And a friend asks, can you help me move this weekend? And instead of thinking, do I have the capacity for this, the energy for this? You think, can she find someone else? Is this really an emergency? Will she be upset if I say no? And based on those answers, based on her needs, her situation, and her reaction, you decide whether or not to set the boundary. That's not setting a boundary based on your needs. That's setting a boundary based on what she can tolerate. And here's what happens. You say to yourself, well, she really needs help, and I don't want to let her down, so I'll say yes. But I'll set a boundary about how long I'll stay. So your boundary becomes something like, I can help, but I can only stay for 2 hours. But that's not what you needed. What you needed was, I can't help this weekend. But you adjusted your need to fit her situation. You see how you put her first, not yourself? And now you're not setting a boundary. You're managing her disappointment. That's where part 1 fails. When you set the boundary based on what they need instead of what you need. Okay, let's say you actually set the boundary based on your needs. You decided, I can't help with the move. Now you have to communicate it. And this is where just say no lives. Everyone tells you, just be direct, just say it clearly. And in theory, that's correct. The standard for part 2 is state it clearly once, no apology, no over explanation, no negotiation. I can't help you, move. Done. Period. But here's where most people drop the standard. They turn the boundary into a request or an explanation or a boundary. Instead of saying, I can't help you with the move, they say something like, I really wish I could help with the move, but I'm just so overwhelmed right now, and I don't think I'd be much help anyway because I'm so exhausted. But if you really can't find anyone else, maybe I could try to move some things around. I just don't know if I can. And you go on and on and on. That's not communicating a boundary. That's asking for permission to have a need. And here's what your nervous system is doing in that moment. It's trying to soften the blow. It's trying to prevent their disappointment. It's trying to make them okay with your boundary before you've even fully stated it. Because your nervous system thinks, if I can just explain it well enough, they won't be upset. But that's not how it works. No amount of explanation will make someone not disappointed. And the more you explain, the more you signal this boundary is negotiable. So they negotiate. But I really need your help. Can you just help for an hour? What if I picked you up? And now you're defending your boundary instead of just stating it, because you communicated it like a request, not a statement. Here's the difference. A request sounds like, I don't think I can help, but let me see what I can do. A statement sounds like, I can't help with the move. One invites negotiation, the other doesn't. And if you want your boundary to hold, you can't communicate it like it's up for debate. Now here's the part nobody talks about. The part where most boundaries fail. Part 3, holding the boundary. Let's say you did part 1 correctly. You set the boundary based on your needs. And you did part 2 correctly, where you communicated it clearly. You said, I can't help you with the move. And here's what most people think happens next. They think, okay, I told them, now they know, so they won't ask again. But that's not what really happens. What actually happens is this. They push back. But I really need your help. Or they forget. 2 weeks later, hey, can you still help with the move on Saturday? Or they test it. I know you said you can't help, but what if if you just come over for an hour? And this is where the boundary actually matters. Because holding a boundary is not about them respecting it. It's about you enforcing it. Let me say that again. Holding a boundary is not about them respecting it. It's about you enforcing the boundary. This is the mistake everyone makes. They think, I communicated it clearly, so now it's their job to honor it. But it's not. It's your job to hold your boundary. When they ask again, you say no again. When they test it, you don't cave in. When they push back, you don't negotiate. Because the boundary is yours to enforce, not theirs to remember. Definitely not theirs to hold. Here's the standard for part 3. You hold the boundary even when they don't make it easy. Even when they're disappointed, even when they push back, even when they forget, you hold it. It's your boundary. And here's where most people drop the standard. They communicate the boundary and they expect the other person to maintain it for them. They think, I told them, so they should respect it. And when the other person doesn't respect it, when they ask again or push back or test it, you fold. Because you think, well, I already told them if I say no again, I'm being rigid or mean or unhelpful. So you say yes, just this once. And what you just taught them is your boundary is negotiable. If they push hard enough, you'll cave. And next time, they'll push harder. Not because they're bad people, but because you taught them that your boundary isn't actually a boundary. It's a suggestion. Here's the shift I need you to make. Your boundary is your responsibility, not theirs. All three parts of it. Setting it, that's your job, based on your needs, not theirs. Communicating it, that's your job. You communicate it clearly with no apology. Holding it, that's your job. Every time they test it, you can't outsource any of this to another person. You can't set a boundary based on what they need and then wonder why it doesn't feel good. You can't communicate it like a request and then be surprised when they negotiate. You can't say it once and expect them to enforce it for you. This is your boundary. You own it. You hold it. And their response, that's their responsibility. They can be disappointed. That's their feeling to manage. They can push back. That's their reaction to navigate. They can adjust or not adjust. That's their choice to make. None of that is your problem to fix. Your job is to set the boundary, communicate it, and hold it. Their job is to handle their own response to it. And if you keep trying to manage their response, if you're setting boundaries based on what they can handle, softening your communication so they won't be upset or caving when they push back, you're not setting a boundary. So don't even kid yourself. You're managing their emotions. And that's not your job. So now you understand why just say no doesn't work. Because just say no only addresses part 2. It tells you how to communicate the boundary. 3. But it completely ignores part 1 and part 3. It doesn't teach you how to set a boundary based on your needs instead of theirs. And it doesn't teach you how to hold the boundary when they push back. So you say no, but you said no to something you didn't actually need to say no to, because you set the boundary based on what they could handle, not what you needed. And you said it in a way that invited negotiation, because you over-explained and you apologized. And then when they pushed back, you caved, because you thought saying it once was enough. And that's why the boundary failed. Not because you didn't say no, but because you skipped part 1 and dropped part 3. And until you understand that setting a boundary requires all 3 parts, deciding what you need, stating it clearly, and holding it when tested, you're going to keep struggling. Not because you're bad at boundaries, but because you're only doing 1/3 of the work. Let me show you what all 3 parts look like in action. So, this is the scenario. Your coworker keeps asking you to cover their shift, right? Part 1, setting the boundary. You ask yourself, what do I actually need here? Not can they find someone else? Not is this an actual emergency? Not will they be upset? Just what do I need? And the answer is, I need to stop covering shifts. I'm exhausted. My own schedule is full. So the boundary is I won't cover shifts anymore. That's part 1. You set it based on your needs, not theirs. Part 2, communicating it. The next time they ask you, you say, I can't cover your shift. Not, I'm sorry, I wish I could, but I'm really exhausted and overwhelmed right now, and I don't think I'd be much help anyway. You just say, I can't cover your shift. That's part 2. You state it clearly with no apology and no explanation. Part 3, which is holding it, 2 weeks later, they text you. Hey, I know you said you can't cover shifts, but I'm in a bind. Can you help me out just this once? And here's where most people fold. They think, well, it's an emergency, and I already told them if I say no again, I'm going to be rigid, or whatever you're thinking. So you say yes, but that's not holding the boundary. Holding the boundary looks like this. I understand you're in a bind, but I can't cover your shift. No apology, no explanation, no just this once. Because the boundary is yours to hold, not theirs to remember or to hold. That's part 3. And if you do all 3 parts, set and based on your needs, communicate it clearly and hold it when tested, the boundary works. Not because they respected it, but because you enforced it. You followed the thread all the way through. So here's what you need to understand. The skill isn't saying no. The skill is tolerating what happens when you say no. When you set a boundary based on your needs, you have to tolerate the discomfort of putting yourself first. When you communicate it clearly, you have to tolerate their disappointment without over-explaining. When you hold it when it's tested, you have to tolerate their pushback without caving. That's the work. Not a better script, not clearer communication, but building your capacity to tolerate discomfort while you set, communicate, and hold the boundary. Because your nervous system is going to scream at every part. Part 1, if you set the boundary, you're being selfish. Part 2, if you don't explain yourself, they'll think you're mean. Part 3, if you don't cave, they'll be upset forever. And none of that is true. But your nervous system doesn't know that. So the real world is proving to your nervous system over and over that you can set a boundary based on your needs, communicate it clearly, and hold it when tested, and survive. That's how boundaries become sustainable, not by saying no better, but by tolerating the discomfort of enforcing them. So here's the shift I want you to make. Stop thinking, I need to get better at saying no. Start thinking, I need to get better at all 3 parts. I need to get better at part 1. Am I setting this boundary based on my needs or based on what they can handle? Part 2, am I stating it clearly or am I asking for permission? Part 3, am I holding it when tested or am I expecting them to enforce it for me? Because if you're only focusing on part 2, communication, you're missing 2/3 of the work. And that's why your boundaries keep failing. Not because you're bad at saying no, but because saying no is only one part of the process. And it's not even the hardest part. This is part 3 of the Boundary series. If you haven't watched part 1 or 2, please go back and watch those first. Part 1, it's called Why Boundaries Feel Impossible, even when you know what they are. Part 2 is called Why You Feel Guilty Setting Boundaries and What to Do About It. And now part 3, this video, Why Just Say No Doesn't Work and What Actually Does. And in part 4, which is coming soon, the step-by-step framework for setting, communicating, and holding boundaries when your nervous system is screaming danger. Please subscribe because this series is building. And if you're ready to stop doing this alone, if you want a community of women who are learning to set boundaries based on their needs, communicate them clearly, and hold them when tested, join Awakened and Rising. It's not a program, it's a circle of women. Weekly live coaching where I walk you through the exact moments you dropped the ball on parts 1, 2, and 3. It's a private community where you can share what's real. We have real accountability for women who won't let you abandon yourself. It's $30 a month. You can join in the link on the bio. And if you're not ready yet, keep watching this series. Start practicing all 3 parts, not just part 2, and prove to yourself that you can do this. If this video helped you see boundaries differently, please hit subscribe and share it with another woman who needs to hear this. Also, leave a comment. Which part do you struggle with most? Is it setting it, communicating it, or holding it? I read every comment, and your stories help other women realize they're not alone in this. Part 4 comes soon. I'll break down the step-by-step framework for all 3 parts. I hope to see